Hello property people. Today I'm going to give you a run through of some of the secret and not so secret websites and information sources we use when we're looking at property, researching property, or if I'm personally buying a property or even selling one of my own personal properties. Some of these websites I'm sure you've heard of before. They're actually not that secret. They're all public, they're all free, all available. So what I want to do is just talk you through the websites that hopefully you'll find handy if you haven't heard of them before. The first two are mainly if you're overseas, and they are Rightmove. Rightmove is a property portal that more or less all agents buy space on and advertise their properties. So in my own hometown of Och, where I live, it'll give you a list of, there's 1, 2, 3, there's mainly Yoppa ones obviously because I'm really busy in the area. But there's a selection of properties, another Yoppa one, that are in Och, for example. You can use this website to go 40 miles of Och. It's the furthest it'll go. But you see there's countless agents that actually put their properties on here. The other one you could have a look at is Zupla. Exactly the same process for Zupla. With Zupla and Rightmove, that captures something like 94% of the market. The other 6% you can find mainly at small one-man band solicitors or one-man band companies that aren't willing, or the clients aren't willing perhaps if they charge them to buy space on Rightmove and Zupla, and they just use their own website. Typically they're very, very hard to sell, but from a buyer point of view, because nobody knows they're there, great to buy, because you're not going to be competing with that many people. So it doesn't happen often, but certainly local solicitors, you could have a look for some of their websites and find properties that aren't on Rightmove or aren't on Zupla. There is obviously a cost that we as agents pay to go on Rightmove and Zupla, but it's well worth it from the return we get. So that's the two websites that if you're UK based you're bound to have seen before. Facebook's a good one. Facebook's really good because mainly for buyers, but I would suggest a buyer that isn't familiar with the area, one way to get a really good snapshot of the area is just put in the town or the area you're thinking of buying in, and you'll see all these groups, what's happening in Inverness, join the groups, and you'll get a really good flavour through the posts and comments of people on there as to what the community is like and what actually happens in the town, from a police activity point of view, from a charity point of view, from a community spirit point of view. So that's something I always urge buyers to do if they're thinking of buying in a certain area. Spend a bit of time joining that area's community groups on Facebook, and you learn an awful lot there. You get a good flavour of what actually goes on. So that's one that I would advise buyers to do. So Rightmove, Zupla and Facebook from a buyer point of view, fantastic, really, really good. Just going to mention YouTube, as you all guys know, because this is on YouTube. We've got a massive YouTube following. We're getting about 250,000 views a month. Regularly getting calls from people overseas. I spoke to somebody in Maine this week, which is north of New York, Minnesota, Chad, which is an island somewhere. It was a US Forces guy, and I think Argentina this week. That's the kind of 3 or 4 countries just this week that have just been in touch, asking for further information, asking about property, asking about how to buy property in Scotland. And I've done a wee video about that, some of you have seen. But equally, and this is quite interesting, there was a course recently, Google is the #1 search engine, #2 is now YouTube. So, Highland Properties, for example, I mean, I'll just put in Highland Properties, no doubt most of ours will come up. There's very few agents actually do this. But yeah, that's Yoppa, that's Yoppa. It's all Yoppa, but I mean, let's say it's a different area. Yeah, they're all Yoppa ones, but a different area. Aberdeenshire, for example, that I don't cover, or Perthshire. Put in that, and you might be able to find some properties that you maybe wouldn't have found elsewhere. So that's YouTube's a really good source of information, really, from that point of view. But yeah, I got a surprise when I was told at this course that YouTube is now the second most popular search engine. This one I use every day, several times a day. This is the Scottish scotland.ros.gov.uk. Again, I'll put the links for these down below. Scotland, as it says there, excuse me, Scotland's Land Information Service. Search the Land Register. So this is free to anybody to use. There's 2 buttons there, radio buttons, property prices or property information. property prices I don't tend to use, but I'll show you how it works. IV3, I'm just using a postcode that is in my head. So this is Merton Terrace, Inverness. So you can go last purchase date, and that shows you the purchases that have been made in chronological order going backwards. As you can see there, so 6 Merton Terrace, 9,900. That's typically a remortgage to buy a partner out. When you see a small sum like that, 91,000 could be a 1-bedroom flat. 24 Merton Terrace. So what this does for that postcode group, it gives you what we call a tonal value for the area. So as you can see, there's nothing above 100 much above 120, 130,000. So that, if you like, is the tonal value of that property. What that really means is that all the properties are the same sort of demographic is not the right word, but they all attract the same type of buyer, and they're typically first and second time buying. So you're not going to find a 4-bedroom detached in there, and if you did, the tonal value of the area would bring that 4-bedroom detached property price way down. Surveyor said to me years ago, you don't want to have the most expensive house in the street. That's what he meant. That would be completely out of place within that postcode group. The tonal value is set at, as we see in front of us there. So that's one way of searching. The one I use is property information. We'll just use the same postcode again, IV3 8SA. It's Inverness postcode. So let's say I want to look at number 3 Merton Terrace. It tells me that was sold in 2017 for £135,000. This I use an awful lot, the map. And the map, in the bit of the pink there, shows that that's the land, including the house, that the property gets. There's an access path there, so you must go through somebody's other garden to get to the property, so it's a 4-plex, and that pink area there shows where the allocated parking is for this particular property. I find that really useful, simply because it allows me to understand what's on the title deeds, and quite often a buyer will think, I own this bit of ground, the title deeds may say otherwise, so it's a really good way to find out what actually goes with the property. And also, I mean, I don't use maps or Waze or 3 words, whatever they're called. This is how I use a map to find me the property. Because I've covered the area since 1989, there's very few places I haven't been to, but instead of me driving up and down in the dark and the rain looking for number 3, I know where it is because I've checked on the EPC Register here. Sorry, on the, used to be called the EPC, it's called the Scotland Land Register. So that is invaluable. So let's say I own 3 Merton Terrace, and I want to see, right, it's worth 135,000 in 2017, that's what I paid for it. How much is it worth now? I often use Nationwide House Price Index. It's quite specific with regard to postcode, and I'll show you what I mean there. So the postcode, we'll put in again, we'll just use the same postcode, IV3 8SA. So it was last valued at 135,123. That's not a surveyor value, that was a market value. So whatever the market dictated, that's what it sold for at that time. That was in, I think was it 2017? Whatever, 2017. I think it was towards the end of the year. Was it? I think it was September. When would you like to compare the value to? This year, and we're in. It won't have the. Will have the information for this quarter. I don't think it will. It's usually a quarter behind. So that shows me for that postcode area, Nationwide House Price Calculator, which are based on actual transactions, the property's gone up by 29.65% since 2017. The nominal value there now is £175,000. That is really handy to know. Another way I use this occasionally, it's just mainly to help people, is if they wanted to, let's say, we're putting 175 here. So 175, 1, 2, 3, and there's a couple in the property and they're splitting up and they want to know what it was worth when they bought it in 2017. You can reverse it in so much as that's today's value. Okay, it doesn't look right. Well, it is right. Yeah, let's see if I put it into here, 17. When would you like to compare the value to? Okay, I've done something wrong there, but you can reverse it so much as you can put the value now and take the time back to 2017 and get a valuation for what it was worth then. In this case, it would have been £135,000. The point of that is that it's gone up by about £40,000 in value. Let's say there's a couple splitting up. they then have £20,000 each out of the profit. That's not it's not set in stone, this kind of thing, but it's a very good indicative website to find out what a property may be valued in the future or what it was valued in the past. So I use that quite a lot. What else do we use? The dreaded stamp duty, which isn't called stamp duty anymore, it's land and business rates tax. I think it's called additional dwelling tax. So I use this a lot, only because when I'm with a client and they're moving on, I'd rather they had all the bad news up front, in so much as I don't want them phoning me 2 weeks before entry. You never told me about stamp duty. So I use this an awful lot. There's the stamp rates there. So normal rates up to 145,000, there's nothing. Then you can see the rates going up there. Additional dwelling tax is if you're buying a second property or multiple properties. That tax is payable whether you are buying that property to rent out to social housing, or you're buying it to live in 2 weeks of the year. Whether you can think that's fair or not, please put in the comments below. I personally don't think that's a fair way to look at it. However, as a landlord, if I was buying a one-off property and to rent out to somebody for the next 10 years, for example, I'd still have to pay the 8% tax. If I was lucky enough to afford a wee 2-bedroom cottage up the west coast, I'd still have to pay that 8% tax. But I'm not getting political. So what I like, this is the calculator at the bottom. So if let's use that one on Muirton Terrace, if it's on at 175 and I'm paying 175 for it, if I'm a first time buyer, 175, 1, 2, 3, they're exempt up until a certain figure. Let's show the calculation. So 175 and above, the first time buyer would pay 2%. Let's say this is just somebody buying a property as a one-off. They'd have £600 tax to pay. Let's say you're buying it as a second home. You would have £14,600 to pay. That's the problem with the second homes tax. So if I was buying that property and renting it out, yes, to make myself an income, but secondly to give somebody else a home, I'd have to pay £14,600 in tax before I get the keys. Please give your comments, your thoughts in the comments below. EPC Register, not something I use because a home report comes with an EPC. The EPCs I think are deemed to be valid for 10 years. However, the Scottish EPC Register, the Energy Performance Certificate, ready available. You can put postcodes in and find EPCs for any given property, really. More for a rental, I think, really. There's very few buyers base their decisions on Energy Performance Certificate. However, it's a legal requirement for us to advertise a property with an EPC ban quoted on the advertisement. So that's kind of dealt with the home report, but it's handy to have. What's next? Right, so I just love ChatGPT. I went on a course with Business Gateway about 2-3 months ago, and I've now discovered what it can do for me. And so I asked a question there, I think, can I have a description of Inverness in the Highlands for a marketing brochure, please? And that gives me a concise description of Inverness and a few highlights. I need that for writing brochures, and it's just completely changed the way that I now write a brochure. But you could put, I don't know, crime rates in the Highlands. Yes, that right. The Highlands consistently registered among the lowest crime rates in Scotland, with a strong detection rate. In 2019 to 20, it fell by 5%. So that is handy to have a quick look at ChatGPT. It's free. I'm sure there's an expensive one you can sign up to, but that can give you quite a lot of excuse me, got a tickly throat. That can give you quite a lot of information about crime rates or schools or whatever you feel like you're asking, you want to ask them about. So there we go. So that's a brief look at some of the websites we use and the reasons we use them. Please put below if there are any websites that you use. Be interesting for me to see them, and hope you found that interesting. Thank you for watching.